websites and news organizations that do fact checking are incredibly important, but we know that the mainstream media also likes to draw false equivalencies between the left and the right. Now, we've speculated that maybe this is because they don't want to alienate or antagonize a giant group of their potential audience or readers. But regardless of why they're doing it, when you look at the specific examples, it is particularly egregious. So we went back and looked at publications like the Associated Press and the Washington Post to see how they compare straight up lies by people like Donald Trump to maybe a person on the left who misspeaks or uses a statistic that doesn't perfectly align with the way that they interpret the facts to be. So let me give you the exact examples and then you can judge for yourself. So we begin with the Washington Post. Now, the Washington Post had a fact check article in reference to what Donald Trump had said about the fatalities in Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria. Now, as we know, the numbers were much higher than what the Trump administration wanted us to know about. So Trump had tweeted the following: 3,000 people did not die in the 2 hurricanes that hit Puerto Rico. When I left the island, after the storm had hit, they had anywhere from 6 to 18 deaths. As time went by, it did not go up by much. Then a long time later, they started to report really large numbers like 3,000. This was done by the Democrats in order to make me look as bad as possible when I was successfully raising billions of dollars to help rebuild Puerto Rico. If a person died for any reason, like old age, just add them onto the list. Bad politics, I love Puerto Rico. Okay, so those were his tweets, and Washington Post luckily did fact check him. So let me give you the fact checking article and what it said. Even the most conservative estimate looking at the excess deaths through October is above 1,000. Trump's tweets are missing a few digits and thus earn 4 Pinocchios.
So, but Trump's should get 28 Pinocchios. I get 4 is the maximum, but for a number of reasons here. And that's why it's important, the distinction that we're about to make when they look at the right versus the left. Trump doesn't bother to look up what the real numbers are, doesn't bother to understand the difference between direct deaths and indirect deaths and how they figured out the indirect deaths are related to the storm and the different studies that go along with it. Instead, he lies on purpose by saying outrageous things like the Democrats did it, when in fact it's studies by different universities that came up with those numbers having nothing to do with the Democrats. And it's not made up, and if you looked at any of the studies, it's not all people who died in that period. That's preposterous. 16,000 people died in the period that one of the studies covered, but of course they didn't count the great majority of that because it had nothing to do with the storm. So him talking about 6 to 18, now they're making up 3,000, it's the Democrats and it's fake news. All of it is total fabrication.
Right.
And it's done on purpose for a political reason.
So the Washington Post would agree because Pinocchio indicates this person's lying, right? Pinocchio is a liar. He got 4 Pinocchios for this statement.
So yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so if that's all there was, fine, great, no problem.
So, but then you have to compare how they give other individuals Pinocchios, right? So AOC received 4 Pinocchios from the Washington Post over what she had said about the Pentagon audit that took place. So there was a Pentagon audit, and it was literally the first audit that the Pentagon had ever had to go through. And we found that there was a giant amount of money missing. And AOC wanted to make a point about how, look, no one ever questions the amount of money we spend on defense or the Pentagon. And when it comes to something like Medicare for all, it's all about how are we gonna pay for it? How are we gonna pay for it? And so she had tweeted this: 21 trillion of the Pentagon financial transactions could not be traced, documented, or explained.
That's a direct quote, by the way.
Yes, that's a quote from the audit. 21 trillion in Pentagon accounting errors. Medicare for all cost 32 trillion over a decade, as we've talked about a billion times before. That means 66% of Medicare for all could have been funded already by the Pentagon, and that's before our premiums. Now, the Washington Post gave her 4 Pinocchios for that statement, and here's their reasoning behind it. In the situation The Nation article is describing the 21 trillion is not one big pot of dormant money collecting dust somewhere. It's the sum of all transactions, both inflows and outflows, for which the Defense Department did not have adequate documentation. But my understanding, based on what the audit indicated, was that that money was missing. That was a giant sum of money missing, okay, that they could not account for.
So let me be super clear about this. Now, there is an error in there by AOC, and we purposely picked the one example from AOC where there actually was a clear error. Now, there's been other fact checks by other organizations like Associated Press and CNN on the issue that she's talking about, Medicare for All, where the fact checkers admit that yes, the Koch-funded study was funded by the Koch brothers. Yes, even that study says Medicare for All might cost 32 trillion, but it saves 34 trillion. Now they admit all those things, but say, yeah, but we don't like it. I mean, those fact checks were miserable. We're not even talking about that. We covered that earlier. In this particular case, the 21 trillion is on both sides of the ledger, so it's not one giant number in that sense. It's not on just one side of the ledger, like 21 trillion missing in accounts receivable, for example, right? So on the other hand, it is a $21 trillion accounting error overall. That is a fact. She correctly stated that fact, and that is a massive problem. If we had a $21 trillion hole in Obamacare, and when we say hole, it doesn't, again, it could be on both sides in inflows and outflows, but people would still be outraged. They would say, oh my God, you can't account for $21 trillion. Or if any company did that, obviously they'd be under massive investigations, etc. But since it's the Pentagon, no one cares. National defense. So that was the main point that Ocasio-Cortez was making. But the part that she's wrong about is, it's not apples and oranges on 21 trillion versus the 32 trillion, because the 21 trillion is not just one sum that's being out there that you could take and apply to Medicare for All. So when she says it would pay for 66% of Medicare, that's not exactly right.
Right.
Now, but she's right about the 21 trillion. She's right about the overall concept that yes, we asked how are you gonna pay for it in Medicare for All, but we never ask it in terms of the Pentagon. And so does that merit, and it is not an intentional lie, and she corrected it afterwards.
Right.
Does that sound like it's the same thing Donald Trump did? It's not remotely the same. Anybody can tell that.
So it's a false equivalency, because on one hand you have Trump, who's just brazen, like just lying about the numbers in Puerto Rico, and also lying about how Democrats are behind inflating the numbers of deaths in Puerto Rico. For Pinocchios, they did the right thing there because he was lying. There wasn't a single portion of his statement or his tweets that were correct. Whereas AOC, she got that small part wrong, right? She did clarify it later, but she gets 4 Pinocchios. And I wanna read you another portion from the Washington Post. Let's go to graphic 33, please. It's unconvincing to try to pass this off as a rhetorical point being misread. It's badly flawed. The same article she referenced on Twitter would have set her straight. The tweet is still up, probably causing confusion. So we will award 4 Pinocchios to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. By the way, the other tweet that she had put up about this, let's go to graphic 32, The Nation, DOD has literally been making up numbers in its reports to Congress, knowing that Congress would rely on those reports when deciding how much to give the following year. To clarify, this is to say that we only demand fiscal details with health and education, rarely elsewhere. And that is a very legitimate point.
How could they not see that? That every time Medicare for All is brought up, people say, how are you gonna pay for that? When we increased the defense budget, which was already monstrous, from 500 billion to about 750 billion in just a span of a couple of years, nobody ever says, oh my God, that's a giant increase, how are you gonna pay for that? And then on top of that, we got $21 trillion in accounting errors, which she's absolutely right about, and no one says, my God, $21 trillion.
Yeah, no outrage about that.
Right, whereas, and again, there's no point made in that Washington Post fact check that, hey, by the way, Medicare for All doesn't cost $32 trillion, because it also saves money. You wanna talk about on both sides of the ledger, inflows and outflows? You never share with your audience that in fact every other developed country has a single payer system, and that costs a lot less than the US system. So if you said, hey, she got the 66% thing wrong, it's a little apples and oranges, that's fair. That's fair to say that. We're not telling you not to fact check people. We care deeply about facts. We're not the right wing. So you say 2 Pinocchios, we get it.
Yes.
But when you do 4 Pinocchios and 4 Pinocchios, and then you make it seem like Ocasio-Cortez is purposely lying like Donald Trump is, well, that's not right. You've given your readers a misleading analysis and you robbed them of the proper context.
That's exactly right. So I want to give you another example. You guys know we're pretty supportive of AOC. We're a little more critical of Beto O'Rourke for various reasons, policy positions, votes that he's taken. And so this next example includes Beto O'Rourke, right? So Beto O'Rourke was included in the same fact-checking article in the Associated Press as another individual who was lying. So the Associated Press gives you an article that says, hey, here are the fact checks of the day. They decided to fact check a statement that Beto O'Rourke made about how much time we have left to do something about climate change based on a UN report. Here's what he said. This is our final chance. The scientists are absolutely unanimous on this, that we have no more than 12 years to take incredibly bold action on this crisis. Well, the Associated Press felt the need to fact check him on this. This is what they write. The facts. There is no scientific consensus, much less unanimity, that the planet only has 12 years to fix the problem. Except he's referencing a report that had just come out, and it was a UN panel of scientists. So Beto O'Rourke opened his Democratic presidential campaign this past week with a call to action on global warming that misrepresented the science.
No, he didn't. No, come on, guys. So look, it was the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they did use the year 2030, which is 12 years from now. Yes, they did that based on the Paris Accords, and no, the planet doesn't blow up in 12 years, but Beto didn't say that. He said we need to take dramatic action within that 12-year period, and that scientists are unanimous on that. But scientists are unanimous. Literally, it moved from 97% of the peer-reviewed studies to now 99% of the peer-reviewed studies that agree that climate change is real and it's man-made. The other 1% largely work for ExxonMobil. So if that's not unanimous, I don't know what is. I mean, what are you doing? Are you trying to nitpick here? If you were to say, hey, that's a 1 Pinocchio because
they don't do Pinocchios, it's Associated Press.
No, I know. And if you were to say, hey, okay, that's a tiny, like 10% misleading because it makes it sound, he didn't say it, but he almost infers that we're gonna run out of time in 12 years and that we fall off a cliff. He didn't actually say any of those things, but okay, I can see like, hey, a little in your opinion, there's an inference in there that you think is slightly misleading, right? But they put it right next to all these monstrous Donald Trump lies that are nowhere near true.
Right, so
that are totally outlandish, let alone the Elaine Chao lie that I think is even worse.
Right, so in the same fact-checking article, they included Donald Trump's statements that Manafort's testimony indicated that there was absolutely no Russian collusion, that Trump was not guilty of any Russian collusion. But that's not true. But like, wait, hold on.
I just want to say, look, on that one though, the Manafort case had nothing to do with Trump and Russia. It only had to do with Manafort. So when Trump says the case proved that I didn't do collusion, it makes no sense. That's 28 Pinocchios. I know they don't do Pinocchios, okay? And so that's an obvious lie. To compare that to a statement that is overwhelmingly true, that there is unanimity among scientists, that we do have to take urgent action. The UN panel did say that within 12 years, we need time for bold action. They didn't say, and neither did Beto, that we're gonna fall off a cliff, et cetera. I mean, to put them in this, to equate those two is almost a definition of a false equivalency. Exactly.
So, and again, I just want to know, we're not the only ones who are backing Beto in his statements. The Guardian did an analysis of this, and they found the world's leading climate scientists have warned there is only a dozen years for global warming to be kept to a maximum of 1.5 degrees Celsius, beyond which even half a degree will significantly worsen the risks of drought, floods, extreme heat, and poverty for hundreds of millions of people. So compare again Beto's statement to what I'm about to read to you. Let's go to graphic 40. Again, this is the same content that was included in the Associated Press fact-checking article. Trump on Manafort's sentencing to a second federal prison term. I can only tell you one thing, again, that was proven today, no collusion. The facts, there was no such proof in that trial or in Manafort's other trial. Whether collusion happened was not a subject of the charges against Manafort. It's one of the central issues in a separate and continuing investigation by special counsel Robert Mueller. So how do you compare that blatant lie to what Beto O'Rourke said?
And I'll tell you why they're doing it in a second, but I'm gonna give you one last example here. In the same fact-checking article by AP, they have a story about Elaine Chao where she basically brags about how they did this safety measure on trains and that they were the first ones to do it and the only ones to do it. Now, the fact check correctly points out, no, that program was started under Barack Obama. And in fact, Obama wanted to do it quicker and Elaine Chao wanted to delay those safety features. She eventually wound up doing it and then comes out and brags that she's the one who wanted to do it in the first place and they're the only ones who did it. I mean, that's in a sense, a more brazen political lie, right?
Yes.
With more consequences. Now, so why do they take those outrageous lies that are done on purpose? And Elaine Chao, unlike Trump, is intelligent enough to know that she's absolutely positively lying, okay? So why do they do that false equivalency? Because they don't want to offend Republicans. So here, their quote unquote fact checking is less about being factually correct and more about being politically correct. So, hey, if I do a fact check with 4 terrible lies from Republicans, but I don't include any Democrats, what's gonna happen? The Republicans are going to yell at me and they're gonna say that I'm biased. You're not biased if you report the facts objectively. If you, instead of reporting things objectively, if you try to make everything even, one side is 100% untrue, and another side you slightly disagree with, and you equate those two things, you're not being objective, you're being neutral. And being neutral to the facts is the opposite of objectivity, and that is political correctness. But they do it so they don't offend Republicans. Well, I put in Beto there. I mean, he's got it 95% right, but I put him in there right next to Elaine Chao and Donald Trump. No, that is the wrong standard. And then on top of that, to call that a fact check is even more problematic. Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.